Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Asia Impact webinar. Today's theme will be what will drive innovation in post-COVID Asia. I'm Dongyan Park of the research department here at ADB. So thank you, first of all, everybody, for attending this webinar. And let me begin the proceedings by making a brief presentation. So let me talk about the special theme chapter of the Asian Development Outlook 2020. The Asian Development Outlook, for those of you who don't know us, is ADB's annual flagship report. It's published twice a year in April and October usually. And both the ADO and ADO update has a special theme chapter, and this year's the April ADO special theme chapter was what drives innovation in Asia. So let me briefly present the theme chapter by way of connecting to our main theme today, which is innovation in post-COVID Asia. Next slide, please. So let me set the stage by going over the key messages of this year's Asian Development Outlook special theme chapter. The biggest one is that the developing Asia needs innovation to sustain growth. Why? Because we are now a largely middle income region, and at middle income, you need more productivity growth, and innovation is the key to productivity growth. You need productivity growth rather than more factors or more inputs. In other words, more capital, more labor, more this and that, more factors of production. Rather than that, you need more productivity growth. And the key to productivity growth is an innovative economy. But on top of that, you also need innovation to improve the quality of growth, more specifically to change the direction of growth toward more inclusive growth, in other words, growth that benefits the entire population, the broader population, rather than just the privileged elite, as well as more environmentally sustainable growth. There are many ways, in other words, in which innovations can promote environmentally sustainable growth as well as a more inclusive growth. Before I continue, though, let me just briefly define innovation, because innovation does mean different things to different people. So innovation, broadly speaking, refers to the introduction of new and different products, services, or production processes that benefits consumers and improves firms' productivity. I think one important distinction is between marginal innovation and groundbreaking or radical or fundamental innovation. Both are equally important. I mean, just because an innovation is not the first in the world or not something revolutionary or earth-shattering does not mean it's not important. Certainly a new innovation that's new to a, let's say, poor country, even though it's widespread in rich countries, that's very useful and important and valuable for the poor country. So in the COVID context, a marginal innovation might be something like a more accurate, right, COVID test that has fewer false negatives and false positives, right? But a fundamental or radical or earth-shattering innovation might be something that we fortunately experienced, we fortunately witnessed in the last few weeks, safe and effective vaccine, right? Which is something that all of us, all of humanity, have been praying for, and it arrived here in record time. Not one, not two, but 3 viable, safe, and effective vaccines. Now, our central message is that there are 5 key drivers of innovation in Asia. These are, in no particular order of importance: sound education systems, innovative entrepreneurship, strong and conducive institutions. In other words, institutions that are conducive for innovation, and the deeper capital markets, And last but not least, dynamic cities that foster, promote, and encourage innovative thinking, innovative societies, and innovative economies. And then the last key message is that building an innovative society, it's going to take a lot of work. All this talk of leapfrogging and so forth, it really isn't true. You need a lot of strong, fundamental hard work to build an innovative society. And when I close, I'll give a more concrete example of what I mean when I say building it. You cannot leapfrog, a country cannot leapfrog itself into an innovative society. It has to get the fundamentals right, and getting the fundamentals right requires a lot of long-term commitment and hard work. Next slide, please. Well, until I guess about 1960 or 70, it's true that Asia lagged behind advanced economies, right? In particular, Western economies in terms of innovation. So the stereotype was that these advanced Western economies produced all these wonderful innovations and inventions. Asian countries like Japan, for example, largely adopted these technologies and produced the manufacturing products based on those technologies, adapted those technologies well, but that's no longer the case. Now, developing Asian countries are innovating and innovating a lot. And some developing Asian countries have in fact closed the innovation gap a lot with the advanced economies, more specifically China, PRC, and the NIEs, countries like Korea and smaller city-states like Singapore. They have managed to greatly reduce the gap with the advanced economies. But the rest of developing Asia still has a lot of catching up to do. But the good news is that when we looked at the data, we find that firms in even poorer Asian countries, they are in fact innovating a lot, what I earlier called marginal innovations. Next page, please. And this is what I mean when I say that innovation, you cannot leap your way into an innovative economy. You have to get the fundamentals right first. For example, you need a sound education system. You can talk all you want, right, about having a creative education system, and the East Asian education systems, right, in particular, Korea, Japan, Singapore, China, these countries, their education systems are often criticized as being good in ABCs and 1, 2, 3, but not so good in promoting creative thinking, right, critical thinking among these students. That's a fair criticism, but even before we get to that stage, in a lot of developing Asia countries, forget about a more creative education system. Let's get the basic education system right. 1 out of 3 10-year-olds in our region, and this is quite scandalous, cannot read adequately. So let's first get the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s right for many developing Asian countries. And for Asian countries that do have this ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, basic literate, numerate, and also now IT skills right, have these fundamentals in place. Then for those economies like Korea, we can talk about reforming the education system toward a more creative, critical thinking type of education system. Next slide, please. And then, of course, entrepreneurs, right? You can think of people like Steve Jobs or Thomas Edison or Jack Ma. They are very important for innovation, for creating jobs, promoting economic growth, leading economic growth, and promoting and generating innovations. But the thing is, most entrepreneurs, right, are not innovative. They are what you would think of as mom and pop stores. So there are very few, relatively few Steve Jobs, a lot of mom and pop stores. So those few highly innovative, highly successful businesses create the lion's share of employment, as you can see in this diagram. Like 0.4% of firms create something like 40% of jobs, okay? So it's an important task for Asia to promote more innovative entrepreneurship, right? Okay, next slide, please. And then we often talk about, oh, you have to have strong intellectual property right, or RPR, but it's equally important that different types of intellectual property rights matter more for innovation as a country develops. For example, if you look at the case of Korea, patents and designs in blue became increasingly more important as the country developed and industrialized, and trademarks and utility models became less important. Next slide, please. And then also, financial markets tend to have a bigger impact on innovation than banks. As you can see from this diagram, this shows the impact of a one standard deviation increase in size of blue is equity market, orange is debt market, and the gray is banking sector. On the vertical axis are patents, right? Relative number of patents. So you can see that equity market, debt market, capital markets in general have a stronger impact on innovation. And the intuitive, I think, interpretation or explanation is that capital markets are better at coping with risk and uncertainty, right? And innovation is inherently risky and uncertainty than banks, which are more conservative institutions. Next slide, please. And I think another important driver of innovation is dynamic cities that foster top quality university, innovative firms, and entrepreneurs bubbling with creative ideas and networking with each other. And as you can see in this diagram, firms that are located in Asian cities where there is a top university tend to innovate more than firms that are located in cities without a top university, whether you're talking about product innovation, process innovation, or research and development. Next slide, please. Now, because the topic of today's webinar, right, is innovation in post-COVID Asia, I do think it's important for me to talk about two specific cases of how innovation, and more specifically, entrepreneurial innovation is helping us, helping the world, right, fight COVID and lay the basis for more sustainable post-COVID recovery. I think you all heard of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine by now, right? It was the first safe and effective vaccine to come out. Then there was the Moderna, right? And then now you have AstraZeneca, Oxford, right? But not many people would know that the brains behind this vaccine is actually two brilliant scientists who also happen to be entrepreneurs. And they are Dr. Sahin and Dr. Turechi. They are the founders of BioNTech. They're German scientists of Turkish origin. They're also entrepreneurs who created a startup, and they have a biotech company with, I think, about 1,400 employees. And the vaccine uses a revolutionary technology called messenger mRNA. I think why are entrepreneurs so important, so vital to innovation? Yes, the profit incentive does play a role, but I think personally, the bigger driver is that this commonality between DNA of entrepreneurs and DNA of innovators. Because if you think about it, both are highly risky activities and both take a lot of risk-taking and risk-taking, big thinking, right? Because entrepreneurship, we all know that 9 out of 10, maybe more likely, more than 9 out of 10 businesses fail, new businesses fail. So it takes guts, courage, boldness, which most people don't have, right? Frankly, to become an entrepreneur. Likewise, innovation, very few innovations actually make it to the market. In other words, there's a very high rate of failure. So it's this kind of common DNA of risk-taking, big thinking, bold thinking, visionariness. I think that explains why entrepreneurs are so important to the innovative process. As you can see in this BioNTech, right? vaccine, right? Which is really the brains behind the Pfizer vaccine. Next slide, please. And then beyond the COVID, I think, let me give you another example of why entrepreneurship, and more precisely, entrepreneurial innovation can help us to a better world, to a more sustainable world. I think you all heard of this Great Pacific Garbage Patch, right? It's a gigantic, right? It's a monstrous plastic garbage flotsam floating around the Pacific. It's 1.5 times as big as continental US. And then comes along this guy, young guy, Boyan Slat. He's a Dutch entrepreneur and innovator. And using very simple physics, he founded this company called the Ocean Cleanup, right? And then using very simple physics principles, it lets the garbage collect itself. It uses the ocean currents, right? It's a passive cleaning mechanism. He discovered an ingenious mechanism to cleaning up this great Pacific garbage patch. So I think guys like these, right, much more deserving of the Nobel Prize than, people like Greta Thunberg shouting at the top of her lungs for save the planet. I think we are well past the active, passionate advocacy phase. This climate change, global warming, it's a clear and present danger. It's a here and now problem. We need concrete, practical solutions like what this guy, young Dutch entrepreneur Boyan Slat, is coming up with. So Slat initially used this crowdfunding because he had no money to set up this startup. And the firm is now extending its activities from the ocean to the rivers, because the 20 of the world's most polluted rivers are responsible for 80% of global ocean pollution. And he's beginning to apply this technology to clean up rivers, such as in Malaysia and Indonesia. So with that, let me now pass on to, this was my last slide anyway. With that, let me now pass on to Madhavi to start the panel discussion. Thank you. Madhavi, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Tom, and welcome to the Asian Impact webinar. My name is Madhavi Pandit, and I'm an economist at the Asian Development Bank. I am moderating today's panel discussion. Innovation has been and will continue to be vital for coping with the pandemic and the recovery thereafter. Digital technology, for one, has played an important role in keeping people connected and economies functioning. New technology vaccines offer the clearest path to normalcy. Today's webinar will explore issues around this question: what will drive innovation in post-COVID Asia? To discuss this, it is my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. We have with us Thomas Abel, who is Advisor and Chief of ADB's Digital Technology for Development Unit, which promotes the effective use of digital technology across ADB's programs. Next is Chong Yok Sin. She is the president of the Singapore Computer Society and managing partner of iGlobe Partners, a venture capitalist firm with interests in smart cities, fintech, and biotech startups and companies. Joining them is Professor Erko Autio, who is a professor and chair in technology venturing and entrepreneurship at the Imperial College London Business School. A very warm welcome to our panelists and to you, our audience. Thank you for spending your time with us today. I will kickstart the discussion with a few questions for our experts. The audience is invited to submit their questions in the Q&A box, and I will raise them with the speakers. Or you can also click the thumbs up button if you concur with any of the questions in the box. Okay, let's get started. Let me begin with a question for Yoksin. Could you highlight for us a few major areas that technology has changed during the pandemic and will probably stay changed post-COVID-19? And why do you think this is so? Over to you, Yoksin.
Well, thank you, Madhavi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thanks. I think one of the key, the key thrust, right, of the pandemic is that it has taught us that connectivity is more important than location. in the past, right, we used to base our economic activities on a location, on a building, or at a workplace, right, or at, we were very place centric. But right now, I think what is important, because of the need for social distancing and, and this need to actually, keep one another, across a distance, and not to unnecessarily, right, come into contact with one another, is the fact that the companies that survive, or the economies that survive, are those that have been able to connect well. So putting your businesses online, right? Or even, having food ordered online, or having healthcare delivered online, right? Through telehealth, education online, right? These are the facets of life that the COVID-19 has changed. But actually, when you look at these digital technology facilitated industries, right, it's not new. And we are very fortunate that actually at this point, when the COVID hit us, that we already have, quite mature telecommunications, right, around the world, with a good connectivity that allows us to connect with one another, if at all, right, through the Zoom, or through, person to person connectivity. I think that has actually enabled us to survive, this COVID-19. So that's the first point, right? It has taught us that connectivity is of paramount importance, right? And will override, right, location and distance. The second thing I think COVID has taught us is that, and it will change things forever, right, is the fact that you have to actually embed digital facilities, right, in almost every field. So what does that mean? It means that if you were like in a construction, you were, handling construction projects, you can't survive if that is not you can't monitor that, digitally. So you've got to get industries onto the digital platforms, right, and operate digitally. And that comes to the third point, right? The third point is about digital inclusivity. The way we work, live, and play, right, has forever changed. Imagine if we did not have access to any of our mobile phones, right? I think it'd be quite a lonely world, right? For even for the elderly, right, and so on. So actually, I think that it has taught us that there's more pros than cons. Of course, there's actually a lot of cons of digital connections. And the key one is actually all the scamming that is now very prevalent, right? And cybersecurity breaches and so on. Because just as businesses have gone and lives have gone online, right? They have, crime has also followed that, or maybe, has pre-led, the activities of digital economy. So, and I think when you look at these things, and we're beginning to see that actually it's not so bad to work from home, right? It's not so bad to have telehealth, and it's absolutely very it's very excellent, very good to actually have your pharmaceuticals and drugs, right, delivered to you, right? So we have actually embraced it, and I think the digital revolution, if I may call it, has kind of accelerated with this COVID. So many things will forever stay that way, and it will be, I think, a hybrid of the offline and the online world that will persist after, after all of us have our vaccines and we've overcome this pandemic. So I think it's fundamentally changed. And along with that too, there are many other deeper changes, right, that has to do with, the fintech economy, right, the way fiat money is viewed, and whether there is even, less necessary as we go forward, right, as we put more things online, and therefore even the currency is now online, right? So those will have a lot of deeper meaning, right, with respect to the way our economies will operate. So I think it has forever changed, and you asked the reason why has it forever changed. I think it's forever changed because we have seen the possible benefits of having that, and it's actually the countries in Southeast Asia are able to actually, I wouldn't say leapfrog, but we're able to get onto economic success faster than ever now. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Yoksin, for that very comprehensive list. I certainly agree that we have seen tremendous progress in technology development and adoption during the crisis. But as you said, the pandemic has highlighted challenges, and a major one is the digital divide. Thomas, could you come in and comment on the digital divide and also on what are some innovative solutions available to close the gap? Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Manavi. And yeah, I think that the digital divide is one of the main issues now that we've seen with the pandemic. That still approximately 50% of the region citizens are not using able to use the internet, and this is a major problem. You know, with the urgency of doing things online with the pandemic, and it'll continue. So you know, there are many options for improving and closing the digital divide. And currently, actually, most people live within a region where they actually could get service. The main problem is actually affordability. Low cost service is the main innovation we're looking for. And there are examples of this. One example that we're actually doing a case study on with ITU is the rollout of the Reliance Jio network in India. That network actually was rolled out as a data-only network that did not support older technology. So it was actually a lower cost network, but it also involved you know, regulatory policy and kind of an innovative business model that focused on not just being you know, a telco provider, but also providing applications and e-commerce and these sorts of things. This is the kind of business model innovation that can happen at a national scale if all of the, you know, the requirements line up. We're not sure that same thing could be duplicated, but we're doing a case study. Another example is we've seen all of the rapid acceleration of satellite technology, and we just had last week some more launches of new satellites from SpaceX. They have a low Earth satellite constellation that's called Starlink, and that will bring connectivity to remote areas more effectively than things like undersea cables, because it will be a global coverage network that also has a potential to be a low cost option for many remote areas. I think the other thing is that we can do a lot of things within ADB. We're actually doing a webinar next week on this topic of combining connectivity infrastructure with other infrastructure projects. So if you're building a water pipeline or a road or a, you know, a power line, you can build the connectivity infrastructure along with it and save a lot of money and reduce the cost of that network by building in fiber conduits in roads or things like that. This is another opportunity because the new networks that are being rolled out, like the new 5G networks, are going to require a lot more fiber, and the cost of that and the speed of being able to roll that out is hindered by policies and difficulties getting access to rights of way and having to dig up roads again because you have to lay down fiber. So there's a lot of areas that we can do and improve the digital divide. And I think ADB is in a good position to support this. We supported over the years submarine cables and satellite connectivity and other things. So I think we have a track record that should put us in a good position to continue to support in the post-COVID environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for those excellent examples. It is certainly an environment where people are expecting innovation to be more evenly distributed, and in fact, for innovation ecosystems to provide what people really need. So let me rope in Professor Erko. Professor Erko, in your work, you often talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem phenomenon. Please tell us what is meant by this phenomenon and how it is closely linked to digitalization. Over to you.
Thank you. Let me first define entrepreneurship, what entrepreneurship means. Many people think that entrepreneurship essentially is about the creation of new businesses. Actually, I would like to define it slightly differently. I would like to state that entrepreneurs, essentially what they do is they spot and validate human problems they develop innovative solutions to those problems, and then they create the organizational vehicles for the delivery of those solutions. Yes, they do start new businesses, but the essence is that entrepreneurship is a problem-solving heuristic. Now, what is an entrepreneurial ecosystem? This is a novel phenomenon, and this phenomenon is fundamentally driven and enabled by digitalization. So we have these regional communities of entrepreneurs, financiers, sponsors, new venture accelerators, consultants, advisors, lean entrepreneurship advisors, who come together to facilitate a shared process of business model innovation that is digitally enhanced. So what we have happening in our economies today is a rapid pace of digitalization that ultimately goes back to the Moore's law. Jeffrey Moore stated, the former CEO of Intel, he came up with this law that the power of anything digital, he was talking about microprocessors, will double every 18 months, while the unit price of that power halves, meaning that for the same amount of money, we will have twice as much digital power every 18 months. So it's an explosive development. And this is the key driver of opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities in economies, because this explosion of digital power today, largely operating in and through the internet, keeps creating these, what we call digital affordances, new ways, possibilities of doing things and rethinking how we do things, how we work, how we trade, how we interact, how we provide financial services, how we provide accommodation services or transportation services. We can rethink almost everything we do. And this is the source of opportunities to which entrepreneurs react. And this is the opportunities, the structural opportunity that has prompted the emergence of a new type of regional community all around the planet, in advanced economies, developing economies alike. So we have this problem-solving process enabled by digitalization, and this is the opportunity for governments. Because entrepreneurial ecosystems, they facilitate digitally enhanced business model innovation. We can now rethink how we can use things digital to maybe do things differently, more efficiently, more sustainably. This is the opportunity for governments. Governments can enhance entrepreneurial ecosystems to drive progress towards a digital economy, which is inherently more sustainable, and unleash productivity therein through the entrepreneurial dynamic. Now, how should they do it? Conventionally, governments like to apply a top-down approach to implementing entrepreneurship policy. And this is one example I know well is the Helsinki region entrepreneurial ecosystem in Finland, initiated around Helsinki University of Technology. Government started promoting entrepreneurship in Finland from mid-1980s, very much in a top-down mode. That meant that they started the science park that was essentially building walls. Government decided that now we need a science park, let's build walls. It continued, this cluster continued in that mode for a long time as a top-down mode. But when the dynamic really took off was when students became active. It switched from a top-down mode into a bottom-up mode. And this is the essential aspect of entrepreneurial ecosystems. The student became active in promoting entrepreneurship. One of the things they did is the world-famous Slush event. This is an international conference for entrepreneurs and financiers organized every November in Finland. And now they have a sister event in Singapore. So there are several lessons for governments here. The real success comes from when bottom-up processes start taking hold. So you need to promote these communities and collaboration within them. Second, developing vibrant entrepreneurial communities tends to take time and requires continued coherent policy emphasis. Policy should not be conducted in a top-down mode. it should be conducted in a bottom-up mode, and the role of the government is facilitating the dynamic in those communities. And third and finally, policies need to coordinate across policy silos. So you cannot promote, if you try to promote entrepreneurship in silos, so you have education policymakers only focus on their own educational initiatives, maybe innovation policymakers focus on their own initiatives, that won't work. It needs to be coordinated. And finally, given the importance of digitalization, entrepreneurship policy initiatives and digitalization initiatives should go hand in hand.
Thank you, Professor Erko, for your insights both on entrepreneurial ecosystems and digital economy, and for touching on the issue of policy support. Let us talk a little more about these enabling conditions for innovation and innovation ecosystems. Maybe Thomas, you can weigh in on how are regional tech startup ecosystems important for innovation? And secondly, how can they be supported in the post-COVID new normal? Over to you.
Thanks, Madavi. Yeah, so I think that, we've already heard Dongyu mentioned and Professor Erko mentioned that it starts with education. I think it really does start with the youth and with universities that where you need to harness the energy of the young people to, to go out and take their newly acquired skills and I'd say up-to-date latest and greatest skills and apply them in a way where they can be rewarded. And I think the good thing about the startup ecosystem is that ideas are quickly vetted. And if they fail, the people move on and try something different. Whereas if you do it in a normal corporate structure, people don't have the urgency to fail quickly. And similarly, if you do it in a sort of a grant or nonprofit approach, there's this issue that people don't try to fail quickly. They try to draw out their timeline as long as possible. So I think that's one thing. The universities. The other thing is ADB actually has launched just this year ADB Ventures, and if you look at what ADB Ventures was inspired by, was the fact that development challenges are underfunded by venture capital. There's so much venture capital going into these main hubs, but most of that is going to existing tech areas, software and e-commerce and social networking and things like that, where there's a lot of opportunity to make large profits, but the development challenges like agriculture and health tech and clean tech, these are way less, much less funded. And ADB Ventures did a good job of studying this to decide where ADB will focus our investments in the tech startup companies that can address development challenges. And I think this is another area where patient capital can come in and provide another way to fund startup ecosystems, especially in the post-COVID, where funding has dried up for some categories of startups. And then the third thing is actually we also do work through ADB on directly supporting developing member governments on tech startup ecosystems. We did a workshop in Korea last year that was very successful and popular. We had 15 government delegations, and we spent a week in Korea, for example, learning about the history. As Dong-Yung mentioned, that Korea has been working for decades on their innovative ecosystem, and they're very willing to share that knowledge and provide sort of a peer-to-peer approach for other governments in the region to learn and to tap into that. And in our case, we actually had some examples of startups getting funded out of just that trip, because getting connected to an outlet for startups in the region. And we do specific work. We do technical assistance in this area, and we have partnerships. So there's a company called Startup Genome that actually advises governments on how they can effectively support their own startup ecosystem, how they compare to other startup ecosystems across the region, across the world. I think it's a rich area for additional work, additional research, additional funding, because every government is trying to, ramp up their policies and their support for tech startup ecosystems. But as Professor Urko mentioned, you can't just do it top down. You have to have a bottoms up, and you have to have a creative approach, because every ecosystem is different. And you can't just copy what somebody did 10 years ago or even last year. You have to look and do something creative. There's a lot of competition in this area as well. So, but I think it's an area that ADB will continue to ramp up our support for. And it's an exciting area too, because the COVID pandemic has highlighted how important the ecosystems are for the digital economy. And I think that it will be, it'll come back strong, after the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. There are some very interesting questions in the Q&A box. And one is that now that we have online learning, the learning outcomes are actually lower than face-to-face schooling. Also, the digital divide on online schooling is more distinct between the rich and poor and the urban and rural. What policy solutions can you offer? This is something that all of you have touched on, but Thomas and Yoksin, would you like to weigh in? Yoksin, would you like to weigh in first?
Yes, sorry. Okay, I needed to unmute myself. Right. I think in terms of education outcomes, right? Yeah, it's. I think I speak on from two fronts. Okay, one is this inclusivity. When we had the home-based learning in Singapore, every child, is assumed to have, equipped with a PC, right? So either the Ministry of Education, right, send some of those, corporate PCs, right, on loan to the kids, to the needy kids, or the kids actually have access to that. But that's only the connectivity and the access. And while many, I think we were quite fortunate that it didn't last that long. So, the kids actually went back to school. But if we have that over the longer term, then even providing a stable connection, I think is as something as fundamental as that is very important. The second point is actually about if you have to do tests and all that, right? How do you get that done effectively, right? So this whole environment of invigilation and proctoring comes into play, right? And unless you have a quite unless you're equipped, right? Unless the Ministry of Education or the school or the university is equipped with such systems, right? It's difficult to actually substitute, with a digital platform where you had done it face to face. So I think it actually it actually forces many of these education institutions to get online. Now, how about the question about what should governments do, right, to facilitate all that? One is actually basic, the basic need now, right, in addition to water and light, right, water and electricity has become the internet, right, has become digital connections, right? So the some around the world, I think talks about should internet connections be made very low cost, so that everybody can afford to come online, because that doesn't become a barrier anymore, right, to learning. So that's one of the policy questions that governments around the world can need to think about, right? That's the accessibility and affordability of this access to online learning. The other aspect is really about should you be teaching more or learning more, and how do you get kids to actually learn more? So that again speaks to the maturity of the educational the system. So again, I think there will be continuous learning. I think learning would have changed, right, to actually incorporate more learning than teaching, right? Because teaching was possible in a classroom manner, but right now in this online manner, it actually lends itself better to more self-learning, right? So really accessibility is the first thing, right? And having affordable access to that first. Yeah, then the others will follow, invigilation, proctoring, ability to actually get the best resource, for the teaching, right? Because now you can, because now you're no longer like, constrained by the physical class or the physical people, right? So the education will undergo a huge change, and I think governments around the world, right, actually owe it to their population to actually enable this. Yeah, I mean that's my take on education.
Thank you. Thomas, did you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, I actually founded an ed tech startup focused on this topic before I joined ADB, and the issue with the current situation, first of all, is absolutely true that when kids have a poor internet or no internet, they are going to be even more disconnected and more falling behind than our unequal education system already had. So connectivity access is urgent. But it's also true that kids, even with connectivity, who have gone online during the pandemic, have fallen behind. And I think this is partly due to the fact that the solutions really aren't there yet. And there are a lot of innovations, but they're really not what's being used as a Band-Aid during the pandemic. We've seen lots of examples. There's a new startup called Minerva that started in Silicon Valley. That's a new model of education that all the students take their classes online, but they actually live in the same building together. There's gamification approaches. There's a company called Brilliant that does math gamification. It's a totally different form of education through gaming, and it's very high-end math. And we actually did a webinar early in the pandemic with Coursera. Coursera does online education. And they opened up their entire platform for universities around the world who were unable to offer courses because their campuses were closed. And they said, well, their platform could handle so much more demand. So they put out basically a press release, said we will allow any university up to 5,000 students to use our platform for free. And they had 80,000 universities around the world express interest. And so there are things happening. I think it's just the problem is this works better at the university level, at the graduate school level. It's very hard for elementary school children to go online with the Band-Aid solutions that we have today. But there are solutions that will be coming along. And even for the young kids, I have kids who are elementary age, and they, their kids are used to doing things online with games like Minecraft and Roblox. And I think there are educational approaches that could leverage, new technologies that are more interactive than just sitting on a Zoom class. And these just haven't been developed yet because nobody wants their kids sitting at home all day. But when you look at the long term of where things need to go with the education system, especially at the university level where we need to get many more people educated, we can't do that with brick and mortar solutions. So I think there will need to be, in the long run, these hybrid solutions or fully online solutions that actually can deliver value, but they have yet to be really proven at scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Professor Erko, there's a question here for you. Please provide a good example of a successful entrepreneurial ecosystem, which has become a hotbed of innovation and economic activity. What lessons from their success can we take for other countries and cities? Over to you, Professor Erko.
Well, I mentioned previously the Helsinki region entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I have studied entrepreneurial ecosystems all over the world. So in Europe, currently I'm based in London. You have what's known the Silicon Roundabout in London that is very vibrant, but also in Asia. I was in Bangkok recently conducting interviews. So what seems to be common to all of these places? First, you need to have places where you have co-working spaces, shared spaces where entrepreneurs work and from many different businesses. and different sectors. And you need to have a culture of openness. You need to have entrepreneurs conducting, experimenting with different models and then sharing their experiences, sharing what works. Remember, what ultimately drives this phenomenon of entrepreneurial ecosystems is digitalization. And digitalization constantly keeps creating new possibilities to do ways in new things. But these possibilities are not immediately obvious. It's not immediately obvious, for example, how you could harness, say, a collaboration platform to rethink how we deliver education for our children. And here I agree with Thomas that it's not only about watching lectures and teacher provide their lecture in Zoom and sitting passively. What we need is a more challenge-driven mode to teaching, and these collaboration platforms could provide a good way to do that. But how exactly to do that? This is what entrepreneurs are instrumental in discovering. So we have these regional communities, take Helsinki as an example, where this entrepreneurial culture really took hold in a bottom-up way. Because these digital opportunities enabled us to rethink how we do things in any sector. These communities, these entrepreneurs working in the shared co-working space, they don't compete against one another. They compete against the old industry incumbents, the leaders of industry leaders of different sectors who do things in a legacy mode, who do things like we used to do 10, 20, 30 years ago. Like we have Airbnbs rethinking how we deliver accommodation services by creating this platform that connects individuals who have free rooms to spare and individuals who need accommodation. You don't need to own buildings to deliver accommodation services. So it's this kind of business model innovation that we are talking about. And we have this experimentation process. We have these entrepreneurs thinking that, well, how could I use this collaboration platform to rethink classroom education delivery? And then they try out. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. They always learn something. And it's this learning dynamic that is really essential to support and create a culture and environment that supports that. In Helsinki, they have done that. In Bangkok, you have many examples of great accelerators where the leading principle of the accelerator, when they accept entrepreneurs to come into their lean entrepreneurship training programs, is that they should not compete directly against one another, because they want to promote knowledge sharing and experience sharing and insight sharing, and therefore collective learning around business model innovation. So that's really the key. We can look at Bangkok. Singapore is an excellent example from perhaps more advanced economy perspective. London Silicon Roundabout is doing well. You have exciting things going on in Munich, in Germany. In Paris, you have very vibrant community. In Berlin, you have vibrant community. So they are all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some very good questions, but unfortunately, we are nearing the end of the hour. So maybe I will go around the table and ask the panelists to give us their parting thoughts on the topic for today, which is what will drive innovation in the post-COVID Asia. Yoksin, let's begin with you again.
Well, I think necessity is the mother of all invention. And right now there is a survival necessity that drives us, to the digital age. And the rest of the processes will just follow. I like to also add a bit to Ako's point just now about, ecosystem is very key for innovation. And I think having the right investors ecosystem is just as important as the entrepreneur ecosystem, because the investors can actually bring the right networks, that are complementary to one another for the necessary thriving, of that entrepreneur company, so that he can thrive, together with a whole complementary ecosystem of other entrepreneurs. So again, I see that is also the same thing, right? Necessity, being the driver of that, of that ecosystem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thomas, would you go ahead?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think that the pandemic has been a terrible, problem for everyone and a tragedy. And I think we can look and say that there's going to be innovation coming out of it, and some of the things that have happened that have been accelerated are going to stay in place. So more people will be able to work from home. We'll have, hopefully some alleviation of some of the problems of traffic and balance of work life and these sorts of things. And we should be able to take advantage of it. But we will need to have a focus on bridging the digital divide, because I think nobody's going to be able to take advantage of it if they don't get connected. And this is still a major problem, because we only have 50% of the world connected today, and the remaining 50% is going to be a big challenge. But I do think that rising to that challenge is now on the table because of the pandemic. So that's another good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Erkku, your thoughts?
Well, we are currently looking at how COVID-19 is affecting entrepreneurship. We have a collaboration with Asian Development Bank, universities from Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia. And let me tell you some of our initial observations, and following on what Jokke Sin said. This is the moment of perhaps the most intensive entrepreneurial experimentation and creative that we have seen in a long time. Necessity is the mother of creativity. We are seeing a lot of creativity at the moment. We are seeing, because we have lockdowns, entrepreneurs cannot continue their business as normal. They are using this time to rethink completely what they do. That's one thing. The second thing I want to mention is that this is a global, complex, a big challenge. This is a very complex challenge to resolve. It's a global challenge, like the climate change emergency. It's a global challenge. Let me tell you, entrepreneurs will be the key in responding to global challenges like this. This is because if you think about climate change emergency, we cannot resolve it in a top-down mode. There's no one single grand solution that we can implement and tomorrow the world is sustainable. If we want to move towards a sustainable society, and this is a salient point when we think about innovation in post-COVID world, wicked problems are not solved in grand moves, but in thousands and thousands of small and practical steps. And this is what entrepreneurs do. In response to the COVID crisis, we have seen in China, Philippines, and elsewhere, entrepreneurs have taken on a much more social mission in addition to their profit mission. If you run a business, you need to be profitable and make money. But these entrepreneurs we have seen, they are reacting to the crisis by taking on a more social role. They are thinking what they can do, how can we contribute to this crisis such that we come over it, and eventually, how can we resolve the global climate emergence? What can we do? It's this kind of attitude that we are seeing that is taking on right now.
Thank you. Dong-Yun, would you like to give us your thoughts?
Just a couple of final thoughts on my part. First of all, I think that the COVID or not, the 5 fundamental drivers of innovation will remain the same. They are, again, sound education system, innovative entrepreneurship, institutions that are conducive for innovation, deeper, more liquid capital markets, and the dynamic cities that foster innovative entrepreneurship and innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's one thought. These fundamental drivers of innovation will remain the same. Secondly, I think there's been a lot of talk, rightfully, I have to say, since the COVID outbreak about expanded role of government in terms of everything. Certainly, there's a big role for the government to play. For example, in closing the digital divide, I think there has to be some level of a public investment there, right? Especially in lower income and middle income countries. But at the same time, and I think I'm on the same page with Erkku here, there's also a big role for entrepreneurship. And of course, governments can help create that conducive institutional environment for entrepreneurship. so that we can have more, as I said during my presentation, Boyan Slats, a young entrepreneur who's helping the world solve its pollution problem, ocean pollution problem, so that we can have more people like Dr. Sahin and Dr. Turechi, the founders of BioNTech, right, who are the brains behind the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dong-Yun. So this brings us to the end of a very interesting and stimulating discussion. We've got excellent insights on innovation, entrepreneurship, digitization, and government policy. Thank you all for attending the webinar. Thank you to our panelists and audience. If you like this event, the next Asian Impact webinar is on the title COVID-19 and the Well-Being of Older Persons in Asia. This is on December 14th, 2020 at 2 p.m. Manila time. See you then.